And then you look at, you go to your business office and ask them what kind of labor and industry claims you've had. They're all from things like that, just brainless things. You really got to pay attention.
Hey, facility stewards. This is Tyler Thompson, marketing manager of Smart Church Solutions, and this is an episode of Facility Mythbusters. The first myth that we're going to bust today is our churches exempt from OSHA?
One of the best four-letter words that a church faces is OSHA. And if you don't know what OSHA stands for, it actually stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which was authorized under the William Steigers Act of 1970, which, if we put it in a nutshell, means don't do this stuff or you'll probably die or get injured. Is it applicable to churches? What do y'all think? Show of hands.
I think it does.
Yes.
Okay.
Except.
So it is, but there's a one particular time and certain thing that it's not. People always ask, well, it's only applicable if you have a certain number of employees. That is correct. The minimum number of employees that you have to meet, the minimum threshold for OSHA to apply to you, is one paid employee, one non-ministerial paid employee. So if you have a receptionist, if you pay for a bookkeeper that works on site, anything like that, you fall under the act. The exception that Patrick mentioned, the exception to this is anyone during the performance of or participating in religious activities. So a worship leader or a worship team being exposed to excessive decibel levels longer than the minimum or the maximum allowed time, you do not have to provide them with proper PPE and reduce the levels and do all that stuff like you would in an industrial environment.
So basically, that same worship leader who's leading worship during a worship service with excessive decibels doesn't need PPE because he's performing a religious function. But if that same worship leader gets on a ladder and sets the ladder on top of a table, which is sitting on top of a trash can, which is tied off to nothing, that is an OSHA violation. Same person, they're preparing for worship, but oops, that is a violation.
Unless he's doing it as part of a worship set.
Well,
I mean,
there's the conundrum.
Yes. Well, or the youth pastor, because we've all seen that.
Now that you know this myth is busted, that yes, indeed, you likely fall under this. What does that mean in practical terms for you? That should be your next question.
You need to educate yourself.
Step one, educate.
So, Nathan, with your experience, you and Pat both, what would be the top 5 to 10 most obvious OSHA violations that we see at churches when we're doing a facility condition assessment that they need to, if nothing else, if you do nothing else, and if you don't read the whole manual, if you at least understand these as being OSHA violations, what might those be?
Well, I'll start off with one that's near and dear to my heart, which is the hazardous communication compliance requirement under OSHA. Because HazCom, which is what it's commonly referred to, is really integral to a successful custodial program. Because typically you're using chemicals. That's what hazardous communication deals with, any exposure to hazardous chemicals on site. So that's anything from bleach, from disinfectant, from sanitizers, to even coffee. There is a SDS sheet for coffee. There's SDS sheets for water, because water is one of the deadliest liquids out there. More people die from water every year than most any other chemical. But knowing what the rules are, knowing what the requirements for safe handling, and this is where we see a lot failing, is the proper way to label a secondary chemical container. And what is a secondary chemical container, you ask? I'm glad you did. That is any vessel that is holding that chemical that is not from the factory. Because any factory chemical, any factory container will have all of the proper identifications on it as to the hazards. But the minute you put it into a spray bottle, the minute you put it into a mop bucket, the minute you put it into an auto scrubber, that is now a secondary chemical container. And unless you can honestly say, I put the chemical in there and this container never lost my sight, that is the only way that you can get away with not having to label it, is if it never leaves your sight until it is emptied and cleaned out.
Okay.
That's a big one to me, and I know Patrick has got several.
Having worked in a church with a large school, climbing on chairs rather than using a stool or a ladder, and not just any stool, a stool that has a grab bar, so that if you start to lose your balance, this is kind of like it just doesn't make sense to, oh, hey, I'm going to climb on that desk, or I'm going to climb on that chair. And then you look at, you go to your business office and ask them what kind of labor and industry claims you've had. They're all from things like that, just brainless things. You really got to pay attention, and then lean into it as a facilities manager to provide nearby items that that your staff can use instead of that nearby chair. So like if you have a teacher workroom, there should be an adequate stool, step stool in every one of those workrooms, easily accessible to their classrooms. So they're going to go put up bulletin board. They're going to do it. Children's ministry, same thing. They decorate the walls, get a stool or a ladder, and then teach them ladder safety. Another one is roof safety. You don't let anybody go up on the roof. Sorry. Keep your roof hatches locked. Again, people find their way through your church. But even once you're on the roof and you're authorized, there are certain protocols that you need to follow when you're on the roof to make sure that you don't end up on the sidewalk.
So do you mean like if you're going to inspect the edge of the roof, you might want to be tied off?
Maybe.
What
about handrails that are extending up from the ladder that goes through the hatch, so that as you're getting out and getting in, you're not at risk of just falling back down to the floor below. I would say, Nathan, how many of the churches that you've assessed don't have ladder safety for roof access? I'd say about 98% of the ones I've checked.
I think that's fair, 98%. And these are, again, we're accessing these things, we're asking people to do it, or they install the fold down wooden attic access ladders into an attic space.
That they got from Lowe's.
Right, and that's a residential ladder. As we think of OSHA and we think of these myths that we're busting, the next myth that's kind of tied into this tightly is that's a commercial building. If you install residential rated equipment into a commercial building, that's an issue.
Yeah.
So ladder, and it's not just ladder safety. If you have the ladders, then under OSHA, what do you have to do annually with the ladders? You have to inspect them. You should inspect them actually before you use them, anytime you use them, but you should also have them signed off on and inspected every year. It's got to have the markings on the side that says this is the type of ladder, this is the weight that it's rated for. You have to confirm that it meets all those requirements still. So if you rip the labels or have paint dripped all over the labels that declare the type and weight rating of that ladder should no longer be used in your facility.
Yeah,
that brings up another point, is what about lift equipment?
Mm-hmm.
You should not, well, number one, you have to have it inspected and certified.
Yeah.
Number two, anybody can't use a lift device. There needs to be some training involved. And number three, use appropriate harness.
That's right.
Because I know it's so easy to just get in there. I'm just going up for a minute to make an adjustment. And a harness is such a pain. And you have to have harnesses for every different person who's going to use that equipment to make sure that it's not getting misadjusted. They all got to learn how to put it on. But this is a life or death type of a thing here. If something goes wrong, your life is on the line. Like you said, could I die from this event? The outriggers that go on a single man lift, don't bypass the sensors and try to operate it without the outriggers, because it can and will fall over.
Yeah, so in my previous life, we built a church building up in Yadkinville, North Carolina. And after the building was done, 8, 9, 10 years after the building was done, the pastor decided himself that he was going to get the lift out to fix some of the light bulbs that were out. The lift fell. He landed his back on the pews and was in the hospital for 2 years and will never walk normally again. real life instance. Okay, this is what happens when we don't follow OSHA guidelines. The other thing, particularly for our larger churches that we serve, many of them have catwalks or they have lighting rigging equipment. And so thinking through, making sure that your lighting and rigging equipment is properly tied off, and that when you go up to change bulbs or to realign your projectors and whatnot, that you are properly tied off in all those instances. And you should be, in the same way you would inspect your ladders, you should be inspecting your safety rails on your catwalks on a regular interval to make sure that the bolts aren't coming loose or the welds have broken or something else. Because the worst thing you would want to do is be up there, think that you're safe, lean on it, and the whole thing comes off the catwalk, and then you have a catastrophic issue. The other thing to keep in mind is this is not to try to scare you, although I hope it does. This is about caring for your staff and your volunteers, and stewarding the responsibilities you have as a church. So if someone were to have a OSHA related incident because you hadn't trained them properly, let's say someone fell off a ladder or whatnot, and their insurance company or your insurance company says, oh yeah, well, let's look at that. Let's determine if we're going to cover that claim. Oh, so can you guys show me where you were doing your OSHA training on your ladders? Oh, you weren't? Oh, I'm sorry. We can't touch that claim. You guys did not obey the national law. So we're not touching that. Sorry. The other thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan, is OSHA does not particularly, but it covers anyone that's working at the church. But how does it apply to a volunteer doing stuff at the church?
So if they're not considered an employee, they're not really covered under OSHA. So if they're a volunteer working on a worship team, or if they're a volunteer doing maintenance stuff, if they're not considered an employee, they don't fall under that. And in that mindset, like you said, we're not trying to scare, but when you consider what does it take to maintain a facility, three things: time, personnel, and money. If you understand there's a lot of things that you are required to do, that takes time, personnel, and money away from the things that you want to do, like the additional maintenance or projects. And the required stuff, because it's not the big thing, gets missed or put aside. But if you're not checking your portable fire extinguishers, if you're not checking your emergency exit lights and signs, that puts people at risk. And OSHA will likely never come into your building for a site inspection unless you have construction going on. Unless you have an accident, an employee has an accident and they lose a limb, an eye, or their life. And when that happens, they are not limited to only inspecting the site of the accident. OSHA then has the authority to inspect your entire campus and fine you for everything that they find.
So bottom line is, churches do fall under OSHA. You are required to adhere to it. So the myth that it's not is just frankly busted.